All right, here we are, first episode of our new podcast. This is Vin and Dave's Destination Unknown.
Indeed it is.
So I've been thinking all day today about how do we introduce this show.
I actually wrote something.
Well, let's hear it.
Are you interested? Okay,
yeah, I'm interested.
Cool. All right, I'm going to whip this out here. This show is focused on seeking knowledge, following the evidence, and illuminating the obscure. We'll delve deep into the paranormal, tackle conspiracies, and explore anomalies of all sorts. We encourage you to take part in the discourse, do your own research, and formulate your own conclusions. This amazing universe that we live in is not only stranger than we can imagine, it's stranger than we can imagine. We don't know where our conversation is going to take us every week, and the only way for you to know is to tune in.
Wow. That's really good. So the genesis of this whole thing is that we've got the wine. We've got the couple glasses of wine here. The genesis of this whole thing had been, maybe, see if scooch you in a little bit. We're missing you on that camera there. Or I'm going to have to figure out something when we're in the middle of the conversation here. The genesis of this whole thing was that we would have these conversations. We've had a few conversations that ended up going for hours and hours and hours. They went into all different sorts of different topics, but starting on the esoteric, getting into some of the occult, weird science stuff, UFOs. We've talked Masonic stuff.
The very first thing we talked about was Bigfoot. It was a dinner with Matt Phillips, like 3 years ago.
That's right. Bigfoot, yes. Well, and so those are cryptids.
Yes.
Today we are going to start out with Cryptoterrestrials, though.
Correct.
So we had spoken about this one, about a couple months ago. And this is one, so with this show, the idea is, and I think what people can expect is we're going to start on a topic, but we're not going to end up on that topic.
No.
We're going to go all over the place, but it's going to be very coherent. That's the one thing about all of these conversations. And it will probably get, weirdly enough, more and more coherent the more wine that I consume, at least. It's always helpful for me. So yeah, but we need a starting point. Of course.
Correct.
We need to have somewhere to start with this whole thing. And so, how would you even categorize what it is that we're, the subject matter that we're doing? I think most people would say it's like in the camp of like conspiracy theory, maybe, but that certainly isn't, that's not how I see it at all.
Are you talking about Cryptoterrestrials in particular?
No, I'm talking about the show.
No, the show is anything. So several of the conversations that we've had have led into topics that, in our opinion, really should be covered seriously by science.
Right.
And you and I both have scientific inclinations.
Right.
We're not scientists by profession,
right,
but we're logical people.
Yes.
We have a logical thought process.
Yes.
And, we do enjoy digging into scientific topics. So there is nothing more frustrating for me as someone who loves, the scientific method than to see, generations of scientists ignoring evidence that's right before their eyes. And I'm not talking about, flimsy evidence that, really has, very little to stand on, but real, actual phenomena that we see. And it could be, it could be conspiracies in some form or another. It could be UFO phenomena. It could be apparitions. It could be science that we just don't sufficiently understand. It could be the whole, hubris that is so prevalent in the scientific community today, where they believe that science is God and that they know everything and that science is the way to know everything, but yet ignoring, huge parts of their own scientific findings and just with a hand wave, like the placebo effect that we've talked about.
And we'll definitely do a show on the placebo effect. The thing we spoke about this a couple days ago as we were sort of preparing for the show. Where I think that science has fallen off is in studying sort of classical Greek philosophy, which is where so much of what we understand as like the Western scientific method was first starting to be formulated. There was a level of that they were mystics. To them, it was like you read Aristotle, very mystical. Pythagorean theorem, like totally remembered for the geometric aspect, the mathematics of it all, right? Mm-hmm. You would think very scientific. Oh no, there was an entire religious cult, like the math. I believe they were the mathematicoi, and the I want to say satyricoi, maybe not. Mathematicoi was one side. Then there were the people who it was like, it wasn't about the numbers for them, was like some glimpse of God.
Yeah.
And Pythagoras was very much more about that part of it than about like using it for architecture or anything like that. The idea was like this level of wonder. They're like, okay, there's something happening in our universe. We're able to sort of describe it with these things, with these numbers. It's weird that like, oh, here's this angle, and then you've got like 3, 4, 5. Like, that's just weird.
Mm-hmm. But that motivation has pervaded science and geometry throughout the years. Especially when you look at like the golden ratio, you look at the Fibonacci sequence.
Fibonacci, yeah.
You look at all of these things that continuously occur in nature, and it is that people are trying to understand in their mind, right? Like, I'm not abdicating a religious belief here, but I'm just saying that was the original thought process, that we can better understand God if we can create a language to accurately describe what we see happening in the world. And that's where a lot of that stuff came from.
So that gets us into sort of where Cryptoterrestrials comes into this whole thing, because for me this is one of the weirdest ones, and it's that conspiracy theory that when I talk to people, this is one that they've almost never heard. I had never heard of it before we talked about it that first time. Yeah, they've almost never heard about Cryptoterrestrials. Now, I don't exactly know where this first or how this first came into my mind. Probably some sort of a psychedelic trip or something like that. But this is one that requires a little bit of humility. And I think that it goes right to what you were talking about scientists believing that they have all the answers. And I think one of the things that you see so often and that frustrates like the ancient alien type people, right, is the notion that where we are technologically is the pinnacle of technology, the pinnacle of scientific understanding.
All technology that's ever been.
Right? Of all times. Yep. Which, as somebody who has now done, over a dozen ayahuasca ceremonies and, has been able to participate in sort of shamanic rituals and plant medicine, there is ancient knowledge that is far more advanced, that is still even in use today, that if you really just approach it from a standpoint of utilitarianism, that you quickly see that, so for instance, ibogaine and its ability to cure heroin addiction. And it's like, oh, well, here's this African plant that's been used in sort of plant medicine, shamanic plant medicine by native tribal people for thousands of years. They've developed it in this way, and it actually works as this fantastic medicine. The way they communicate about it is not in the jargon of the Western pharmaceutical language, but it's almost like if you were communicating about it in that language, you would get stuck there. Instead, they're just like, no, here's a tool. Let's use it, and we know how to use it.
Yeah. But, it's frustrating that we have something out there in the world like this that has the potential to alleviate suffering big time, and it has not been fully explored. It's like, why do we not have a team of doctors working on this right now?
Because it's the mystery, which is where all of science started, particularly in the West. I mean, we're going to do shows about alchemy. I know that's a huge one. It comes from, alchemy, it's alchemet, so it's from Egypt. That's where it initially came from. So it said, oh, well, this is just the thing that the Egyptians were doing, is literally what alchemy means. And then, of course, chemistry comes from there. So chemet is right in there, like the Egyptian piece of it is right in there in the word. But that was again, there was this spiritual component. I think that in order to do real cutting edge science, there has to be this, I don't want to call it acceptance. It's almost an embracing and a celebration of the mysterious.
Sure. How else are you going to understand it? And that's the thing, is like so many mysterious things throughout the past have become understood in a more scientific way because somebody wasn't afraid to look at it.
Right.
And that's what I'm seeing today is a lot of scientists, it almost seems like they are afraid to take a look at the weird and the unusual and the anomalies that occur, and they're everywhere. And they don't want to pay attention. They don't want to, because they're afraid of ridicule. They're afraid of, being, losing their grant, being thrown
that's
out
a big
of
one.
their
The money aspect is a huge aspect because it's an industry, right? It's the science industry at this point.
Which is why it's so important for private, private people and amateurs, really, to get involved and start doing this. So many of the things that we are going to talk about could really be helped if we had some serious brain power thrown at it, and it doesn't have to be from a university or from a corporation or from the government. Let's all do it ourselves.
So I think one of the things about doing it ourselves is to start to approach some of these topics which is something that I have really enjoyed speaking with you, is that you can get a long way just with rational thought.
Yeah.
You can get a very, very long way. You can at least eliminate a lot of things. But you can also, when you get into the things that are like, that makes sense, that makes sense, that makes sense, that makes sense, and it just makes sense on its face. Those are the things that I think are really worth exploring from a scientific standpoint. So, cryptoterrestrials.
Yes. One of the things that you said just reminded me, part of the book actually talks about that there may be experiences and imagery that may actually be hardwired into the human brain.
Is this the book, the Cryptoterrestrials book? Okay, we'll get into that.
Yep.
No, go ahead. Continue. I'm sorry.
Cool. No, it's fine. So I thought we were coming back around to it.
We are. Go for it.
Fabulous. So as you were talking about with, people experiencing these visions and how consistent the visions and experiences are from person to person to person, and, how there is this like underlying theme where the same thematic elements are repeated, no matter who tries it, right? You're going to have a very similar experience to the people that came before. That makes no sense at all if all you're doing is having some random hallucination, from some psychoactive substances. That makes no sense. However, if there are either one, you're plugging into something external to yourself, or if there are these engrams, if you will, embedded in the human brain.
Like the Jungian archetypes, kind of.
Exactly. Right. Yep. Exactly like the Jungian archetypes. So like DMT, right? People report very consistent experiences, just like the experiences by abductees, right? So you think about abductees, they all have very, very similar experiences. Yes. They all see the same kind of aliens for the most part. Mostly they're reporting the grays with the big wide eyes. And, occasionally you'll get some reptilians or some insect people, but for the most part it's the grays, right? And so they have this archetype. What I thought was kind of cool, one of the stories that the author recounts is filmmaker Mike McDonald, who told a story of when he was a child. Him and his father were hiking. They went into a cave and they met this large plant person, a plant creature, sitting on basically a throne of stone. Very weird story.
He and his father,
who was a Royal Canadian Mounted Police at the time. And his father has no memory of this whatsoever. But the kid remembers his father being terrified of this encounter. So was it a dream? Was it real? Don't know. The weird thing is, this plant person had a face very reminiscent of a posy flower, right? So if you've ever seen posies, they kind of have like facial...
kind of look like a face almost.
A little bit. So what I realized is that, because of course, the first thing I did was look up a bunch of images of posies.
Sure.
And I'm like, you know what that is? That's very much like the Green Man. So are you familiar with the Green Man sculptures?
No, go. Tell me.
So
Talk to me.
the green men carvings are found throughout the world, mostly in medieval Gothic cathedrals. They usually depict a male face surrounded by leaves or plants, or they have vegetation, growing directly out of their eyes or their mouths. They're all over. There are over 100 examples of the Green Man in Rosslyn Chapel.
Oh, Rosslyn, of
which
course,
is something you might recognize. A ton of other ancient cultures actually had very similar green deities, similar to the Green Man. Sumerians, Enkidu, for example. Egyptian god Osiris, also represented with a green face. But yeah, tons and tons. If you just want to do some searching, also, coincidentally enough, May Day, the holiday, the celebration, May Day,
pagan fertility ritual day. This is where Burning Man comes from, right? They would Wicker Man celebrations. That's May Day.
Yeah, so May Day is really more about flowers and growth and rebirth and all that. And in some celebrations, they actually have a garland king, I think is what they call him. Mm-hmm. But it's a dude dressed entirely in flowers, head to toe, covered in flowers. And I'm like, this Green Man imagery, right? Mm-hmm. Obviously, it's been around for a very, very, very long time. And for whatever reason, this kid, in this experience, whether it was a dream or hallucination or it happened in real life, was basically plugging into that same sort of imagery. So, we obviously have a thread of connection, throughout history for this Green Man figure.
So it is these sorts of connections that travel down through history, and it got... Again, I don't know how this whole idea came into my head, but I will start out with the idea and we'll move to Cryptoterrestrials because that's a great intro. I think that the way that this got started for me was I saw a short documentary about domesticated foxes. Now, the domesticated fox program was something that the USSR took on. They wanted to see, they were doing experiments, they wanted to really understand the process of domestication. I think there's supposedly that they did some really weird, I think they were trying to make like animal hybrid super soldiers. There's supposedly some evidence that they actually created humanzees. Because I think humans...
Also mentioned in the book.
Yeah, that humans and chimpanzees can actually create a hybrid, something like a donkey and a horse can. And that this is actually known, that scientists have known this for a long time, that the USSR actually had bred some humanzees, which is fucking creepy. But so what they learned... And you can actually now go and buy these domesticated foxes as pets. They're out there. There's a community in the U.S. now, but it started with a line in Russia. And basically what they did was they had some foxes. Silver foxes, I believe, is the breed that they used. Russian silver foxes. And they just started breeding them. People had been breeding them for fur. But in this case, they were like, well, we want to breed them for domestication, not for fur, like to see if we can make pets. So what they would do is they take every litter, the ones that were the most sort of friendly towards humans, they would let them live. And if anyone snapped or whatever, then they would kill them. It only took like 6 generations before they basically got like this new species, a domesticated species. Now, what was interesting about this species was totally friendly towards humans like a dog, in a way that wild foxes just simply are not.
Right.
And you can go on YouTube and just search in domesticated foxes and see. These foxes make noises when they're interacting with humans that wild foxes do not make. Their pigmentation also started to change. They started to get white streaks, white blotches, which was weird because they were not at all selecting for anything except their behavior toward humans. But if you look at domesticated animals from cows to dogs, you'll see this white spotting, pigs, that this what you would, I guess it's not hypopigmentation. You'll see that in almost every domesticated animal. And then you look at their wild version, they don't have that sort of that white pigmentation, right? It's just in the blotches, the weird blotches. And you'll see this with like bulldogs especially. That's a breed that's been heavily bred for like their interaction with human beings, and they'll sometimes come out all white and whatnot. Pit bulls is the same thing. So as I was looking into this and thinking about it, it really got me in this place where I was thinking, you know, human beings have some characteristics that don't seem to make sense.
That is an understatement.
Other than when looked at through the vein of possible domestication. And one of the things is we live on top of each other, and we're able to deal with strangers.
Yeah.
In a way that like certainly no other primate can do. And we don't really know about other hominids, but even in a way that it's humans that are and it's weird. It's like, is it nature? Is it nurture? Because it does seem like even those humans from tribes that are sufficiently isolated, you know, introduced to new cultures, seem within that same generation, sort of epigenetically, to be able to deal with it in a way that their culture was not built for. So it's almost like humans are hardwired to be able to sort of deal with strangers coming in, which is weird for a carnivore.
It is. I mean, there are some that would say we're an omnivore, not a carnivore, strictly. And there are also people that would argue that our ability to socialize and be more quote-unquote domesticated actually led to more survival because we clustered together into groups, we shared resources and, did all of that. What just boggles my mind, and this is something that, we talked about, I think the first time that we had this conversation, what boggles my mind is that the vast majority of society has to be polite and well-behaved. Otherwise, we wouldn't have the world that we have.
But people are willing to do it. That's the interesting part about it.
And honestly, a lot of times it doesn't even cross their mind not to do it.
This is what I'm saying.
Right. So if you didn't have at least 80-90% of the population just unconsciously
I see your point.
Going through life being nice to everybody, it would be Kronos, the Klingon homeworld, right. Honestly. I mean, we would all be like stabbing each other in the dark,
And so this does happen. I mean, there's a high level of homicide, certainly in certain Amazon tribes, New Guinea, some of the places that people would say have had the least contact with quote unquote civilization, right? So what it got me to thinking about was, I said, okay, this is sort of the vein that it started to go to in my mind. About 10,000 years ago, all of these domesticated species start showing up, right? Mm-hmm. It's cows, sheeps, all the domesticated pigs, all the domesticated animals, the fowl, as well as domesticated plant species. Your domesticated grains, all of the... Look, domesticated wheat is very different than the wild grass that is the ancestor of wheat and barley and millet and all of these. People don't really understand and recognize.
All of our fruits and vegetables, same thing. You look at a fruit or vegetable that was grown 100 years ago, it's completely different than today.
So, but 10,000 years ago, we had all of these species sort of pop into existence. And the common wisdom about that is, humans developed the technology of domestication at that point. But I stopped and I said, well, what else did we have pop up at the same time? We had civilization pop up at the same time. And as we've just discussed it here, we had the first city-states, we had religion. We had people falling into a hierarchical order, which, as you say, requires that a lot of people be polite and all of this. And I'm like, maybe what you had happen was you had a different species of human appear on the planet at that time, domesticated human. And perhaps we are domesticated human. Now, here is where the proof starts for me, the rational proof. We know for a fact that we have been, as Homo sapiens, present on this planet with, we know for sure from fossil records and carbon dating of those, at least 7 other human hominid species. So we're talking about, for sure, Neanderthal, Florensis.
Yep, the Hobbit.
Yep, that's the Hobbit. Perhaps Habilis. There are some other, perhaps Australopithecus. There have been some various other ones. Now we know, or we think, we believe that human beings, Cro-Magnon, I believe, was also on the planet at the same time as Homo sapiens, at least in the early going. Denisovians. So we've got all of these other ones. What we always assume is Homo sapiens. It even says it in the name, right? Thinking man. We always assume Homo sapiens was the smartest out of all of them. Well,
but that's our Homo hubris coming out.
Right, there you go. We always assume that we were the smartest just because we are still around. And as I started thinking, I said, let me just play this out in my mind and see if this is crazy or not. What if there was a smarter creature? And what if it was smarter, and perhaps smart is the wrong word, right? It wouldn't have to be necessarily smarter. There's a lot of things that could, it wouldn't necessarily have to have the processor power per se, or more memory. It could have better bandwidth. So for instance, if it was able to speak with both its hands and its voice, or maybe add additional clicks, or maybe it could hear additional tones and it could make additional. We know that the Neanderthals didn't have a hyaloid bone, which made it so that they couldn't actually enunciate as we do. Well, what if there was even another level of enunciation to be able to communicate even more, right?
And the weird thing is, they had bigger muscles. They were physically stronger, more robust.
But they were vegetarians, I believe.
Were they?
I think that they were complete vegetarians, yeah.
Interesting. And larger brain capacity, right? So they literally had larger brains than we do. But yet, you're right, they did not have, as far as we can tell, the ability to speak the way that we do.
And so I think it's to start thinking in those sorts of, that it's not necessarily how smart you are, but what gives human beings their particular adaptive structure, especially for organizing, is speech.
Absolutely.
Speech
is almost a superpower unto itself. And it can be used for good or evil.
And it is.
It is. All the time.
It most definitely is. So I played this scenario out in my head, and I said, okay, let's imagine that human beings, let's imagine that there's another hominid on the planet. Because although we found fossil records of 7 other species, there were if we found 7, there were probably 20. You know what I mean? Because bones go away. We're not gonna. It's hard to find bones. They've got to be preserved in some bog or something like that. So,
or if your society believes in disposing of your dead in a particular way that prevents the remains from being discovered at a later time.
There you go. Same idea. Cremation would do that.
Absolutely.
Right? Okay, so let's say we have this other species. Let's say that this species perhaps are the ones responsible for the pyramids. Let's say that this species is the one that develops the ability to domesticate. We know that some species, we assume it's us, We know that some species 10,000 years ago all of a sudden just was like all this. Now, the ancient aliens people would have it be said that, oh, those are ancient aliens or whatever. Okay, what if it wasn't from another planet? What if it was from good old planet Earth? So now you have these. So you imagine that they are domesticating all these animals, and they look around and they see these other hominids, and just like the Russians with the humanzees, perhaps they introduce a little bit of their own DNA into the mix. Perhaps they just start domesticating and breeding these particular. Look, they breed like rabbits. Mm-hmm. They're relatively easy to control. You can scare them. You can tell them stories and like create these narratives and all of this. And you start to look at it and you say, okay, so here you've got these cities, and you have this ruling class who have some connection, at least in the historical understanding, to the gods, or are considered to actually be gods.
Sure.
Right? Like the Egyptian pharaoh and all of that. The initial going is that these rulers are actually gods. And so then you start to look and you start to think, okay, well, you imagine a cattle ranch.
Mm-hmm.
Right? How many ranchers are there per head of cattle?
Yeah, one.
one rancher to thousands of heads of cattle. Yeah. Why would it not be that same thing if you were domesticating these hominids, especially if you figured out a way through this thing that you can, these stories that you were able to concoct to scare and motivate them, to move them forward. So I was like, okay, this actually, and this is what I'm saying. I'm like, okay, that actually kind of makes sense to explain like fucking everything.
Yeah.
Except the question becomes, then where are they? They're
still there.
Well, I think there's a couple of options. And so I want to just explore those before we actually get into this interesting story of Mac Tonnies, which really brings this thing home, and the book Cryptoterrestrials. So here's some options, and you can add on to these as you think of them. My first thought was that perhaps they died out from a plague. I mean, our animals give us diseases: anthrax, swine flu, bird flu. Maybe it killed off 50% of the Homo sapiens population, but it killed off all of these rulers, these ranchers, or maybe only they were susceptible.
Well, let me ask you this first. What makes you think they all died off?
Well, because you don't see them anymore.
You don't? Are you sure?
I don't know. Well, that's the whole thing.
How would you know?
Yeah, see? I don't know.
You don't know. So we're building, a conclusion based on assumptions that we really have no way to test. I am, 100% in agreement that this is a possible scenario. I also think that the same people, beings, creatures that have served as the Sumerian kings, the pharaohs, the great leaders of the past, could potentially still be among us. Maybe they're not out in public. Maybe Donald Trump is not one of them, but they could still be here, exerting their influence. There are a lot of secret organizations, secret societies, and I'm not necessarily talking about the Masons, but I'm talking about like the institutions that are known, right? I mean, we know about the Bilderbergers, we know about the Trilateral Commission, we know about those guys. What's to say that those entities, those organizations are not, receiving guidance from one of these entities or many of these entities?
There's nothing to say that that's not the case. It could absolutely be the case. I'm just trying to. No. This is my reason why. This is the reason why I say that. It feels to me like the pageantry of the ruling class throughout history feels a little cargo culty to me. The pageantry feels like, the costumes, the symbols and all of this, the staff, and it feels to me like there's the crown. Yes,
hats, the big long hats.
That's what I'm saying.
That emulate the elongated skulls.
Could be
of these potential leaders.
Well, this is what I'm saying. That all of this pageantry is an attempt to dress up as these things that are now no longer there.
Absolutely.
Right? That's that. It feels like that to me. Mm-hmm. I feel like if these things were still around, there would be very little reason for the pageantry because they would always be 10 steps ahead. It's almost like, the rancher has no need to dress up as a cow and make the cows think that he's a cow. Or dress up as a sheep and a shepherd to dress up as sheep and make, because they're sheep.
But a sufficiently intelligent cow could put on a rancher jacket and walk out and say, "I'm the new rancher."
Well, that's the plot of Animal Farm.
Yeah,
that's Orwell's Animal Farm.
Yeah,
right. And so that's what I'm getting at here. Is that were these things still around? What reason would they have to hide?
I don't know. I mean, there again, I don't know that they're hiding. I mean, I think the world is in a sufficiently messed up place that I wouldn't discount the influence of just about anybody at this point.
Okay. That's fair enough. What about this idea? What about the idea that they left the planet?
It's possible. They could have also gone back underwater, gone back underground. Throughout history, we have stories of civilizations, whether it's Atlantis or whether it's, under subterranean races. There are constantly stories of races coming from over the sea or out from underground and, attacking or having some kind of influence. These kind of things happen, have been reported throughout history. Maybe they went back. Maybe they died out. Maybe they're still here. Maybe they went off into space. I don't know. I mean, it is.
So Mac Tönnies. So now I guess that we can talk about Mac Tönnies because this guy. So this is the author of the book, Cryptoterrestrials.
Yep.
Interesting story. So the story. I'm going to get the years. Maybe do you have the book? Because maybe we could get what the year of this whole thing was, if you can find that.
I'll start. Publication date.
Yeah, what's the publication date?
That is a great question.
Because it's sometime, maybe a year or two after.
2010.
2010. Yeah, so I was going to say 2009. I thought that it was 2009 that this whole situation had happened. So basically, when I had first thought about this, I said, well, I wonder is this like a thing? Right, like, is this like a ancient alien? Does this have a name? What it is that I'm talking about? Right, that's what I had thought. Does this have a name? Yeah, let's do this. That's the book by Mac Tonnies, and so I had gone and started just sort of searching this, and there was not a lot, but this word Cryptoterrestrials came up, and this guy Mac Tonnies. So here's a story of Mac Tonnies. Mac Tonnies was a ufologist. He was big into the UFO stuff. He was well known in that community. He'd go to their.
He had a little bit of an attitude about being identified with the fellow ufologists.
He did.
Kind of thought he was in a different class.
Well, and clearly, people can judge for themselves when they hear the story whether or not he was in a different class. I would say that he was in a different class. He was active on like the UFO boards, but he also had this thought about the Cryptoterrestrials. And he started writing about it on these boards, discussing it with people, discussing it at conferences, and started writing a manuscript about essentially the idea that I just presented, right? He's got a little bit of a different spin on it, but it's essentially this is essentially the idea that these are not UFOs, because he was tied into the UFOs, that what you're seeing evidence of an advanced civilization that has always been on this planet. They're not human, or they're a human-like species, and they've always been here. So he started writing this manuscript, and as he was getting to the point of almost having it done, he got invited to go on Coast to Coast AM with George Norrie, and he went on.
Great show, by the way.
Great show. Went on. I think they did 2 hours together. Wow. The recording, I've looked for the recording. It's I know they have Coast to Coast AM has the archives that you can go back, and if I knew the date, or if somebody wants to go and find it, it would be amazing. He goes on. 2 weeks later, he's at home. Everything is normal. Actually, he's one of the few. His account is one of the few accounts that I follow on Twitter. If people want to go into my followers list, they can look at Mac Tonnies, Tonnies, or you can just look up Twitter, Mac Tonnies. His Twitter account's still active right now, as a matter of fact. But he was mid-30s, I believe 36 years old. Good health, no problems, everything normal. And yeah, 2 weeks after he did the George Norrie thing, dead of weird undiagnosed heart condition in his bed. You can literally see him tweeting up to just a couple hours before his death, just normal stuff. 2 hours after he does this, boom, dead. 2 weeks later, dead. His friends go to his house, manage to find this manuscript, publish it posthumously. But I just think that it's so weird that the person who was sort of on top of this idea would die in such a mysterious way. And the fact that, to me, this is such an interesting take. Ancient Aliens is so popular, that concept. I mean, I've got the Zecharia Sitchin books down here. Yeah. I love those. And
the television shows
Von Daniken and all of that.
For like 10 years.
This is what I'm saying.
Yeah.
But this is actually much more plausible to me.
Yeah, and I can see that there is certainly an argument to be made that there are other intelligent species on this planet developed, in concert with us and parallel with us over the ages. I can certainly see that happening, and in some regards, far more likely than space visitors from another star.
Well, this is what I'm saying, that it's more plausible than...
Absolutely, yeah. I don't know that there is necessarily an either or, and I think that's really how he made it seem in the book. And that was one thing that struck me about the book, was he made it seem like, this is my theory, and if you buy into my theory, you can't accept the other theory. But to me, it's like both have merit. Like, I could definitely see that there were extraterrestrial influences alongside terrestrial influences that we don't understand currently.
And why do we believe that we would understand an extraterrestrial influence if it... I mean, Terence McKenna believes that mushrooms are aliens.
Sure.
That the mushroom came from out of... There's actually, biologically, there's a pretty good case to be made, because there are things in the mushroom genetics that do not exist, certain proteins and whatnot that just simply do not exist anywhere else.
Yeah, if we want to go a little further up the food chain, octopi. Same thing.
Yes.
Octopi are not of this world, apparently.
Yeah, I've heard about this. I've seen some of the research on this. Again, it's genetic, the genetic research, right? Yep. That they have some sort of weird protein that is like present nowhere else.
Nowhere else.
Very, very strange.
No other life forms. It's incredibly odd. One thing that I do want to bring up about the genetic, like GMO is a big thing right now, right? What if humans had been genetically modified to keep us under control? Remember what they did with the dinosaurs in Jurassic Park?
Yep.
The lysine contingency.
Right.
We have the vitamin C contingency. Did you realize that we are one of only 2 species on the planet that does not produce our own vitamin C? We have to have vitamin C from an external source to stay alive. Dogs, cats, pretty much anything else you can name on the planet, they make their own. Their body produces their own vitamin C. Humans do not. Now, is that because throughout history we have been surrounded by orange trees?
Probably not.
Probably not. So there is definitely something else, I believe, at work. I don't know what the factor is, but something else is at work there. And it's conceivable that it was designed in just in case.
Now, what would make you think that... Or lay out the scenario for me where vitamin C, where control of vitamin C would be a way of keeping human beings under control. Just lay that one out for me.
Sure. So not talking about modern day, but
Okay.
think about 200, 300, 5,000 years ago.
Okay.
Right? So in the time frame that you're talking about where these cryptoterrestrials were actually running the show, and so they had this inside knowledge about how our bodies worked. There was no concept among humans, you and me, normal today humans, no concept at the time about vitamins or health or how to stay healthy, whatever. If you had your vitamin C cut off, you wasted away and died. You got scurvy and you kicked off. I mean, this would be a way for mass crowd control, population control, if the provider, right, set themselves up as a provider god, and I give you health, I give you the ability to continue living, have children, raise your family, and if I withdraw my love, my support, if you don't support me in the way that I need, then you're all going to be sick and die.
Yeah, I like that. I like that notion because it's kind of like it adds this almost like a mystical element. Like, it's not super advanced chemistry, but it has like this sort of mystical element to it, to where, you imagine this sort of provider god, had a source of vitamin C, right? Maybe this is the manna from heaven, right? That it was either somehow mixed into the food, or it was a certain food that would need to be given to them, but otherwise their entire diet was vitamin C deficient.
Yes.
Such that you could almost punish an entire population by just simply withholding, and that they would have no idea why it was happening.
No.
And it would just appear, they'd just start to get scurvy, and it would just, but that it could be eliminated like that.
Exactly.
And they could be brought back to health.
We have displeased God. God has not provided us the manna from heaven. We're all sick and withering and dying. God shows up and says, are you going to be obedient? You're going to be good? We say yes. And then he provides the oranges, the manna from heaven, and suddenly we're all better. Everything's great. And we thank God, and we go, we will always be loyal.
Yeah, okay, so what that brings up then in that case is we're talking about a pretty sophisticated, like what level of sophistication in terms of breeding or in terms of genetic modification do you have to eliminate the gene for making your own vitamin C? Or is this just a happy accident in breeding of these creatures that some creature comes along that it randomly gets sick, except that, it eats this food and then, it's okay. And then you figure, well, let's just only breed that one. Like, that's awesome.
I don't know.
Is that what do you just breed them like that, and you don't even have to have like a high level of? Do you not have to have like some genetic engineering?
I could see it going both ways, quite honestly. I mean, I could see it going the genetic engineering scientific way. I could also see it going we only let the ones live who liked us. Just like the foxes. It's like we only kept the ones that liked us. So I could totally see it going that way, and it just being an accident of the breeding practices.
So I think that what for me this whole thing brings up, like why this is a dangerous notion, is the dangerous notion. It's a dangerous notion in that if we are a domesticated species, things like war start to get really very, very scary, because it's almost like you're fighting dogs at that point, right? But what I also wonder about is if those in charge. So let's say that there isn't the overlord, the secret cryptoterrestrial organization or individual, the ranchers who are really calling the shots with the Trilateral Commission and the Bilderbergs and all that. And let's say that it's just Animal Farm at this point, right? Let's say that it's just the farm animals calling the shots. Aren't we almost doomed as a species to be, while individuals may be able to find their way, isn't the species rather doomed in the way that, a pack of dogs, feral dogs. I mean, do they really go wild? What percentage of them are able to actually go wild and survive? Most dogs that you see on the street are in a pretty shit state. You know what I mean?
Once domesticated, animals can't go back to the wild. I mean, there comes a point where you just cannot recapture the wild spirit, and you're done for.
Well, there are some animals that can, like pigs can go back, as I understand it. I was told that by my friend Jack Spirko. He said pigs can
I
go
love Jack.
wild.
By the way, Jack, if you're listening, we got to hang out and do the knife thing again.
Yes, he's amazing and has been a great mentor to me. But he said, that pigs will go back and they'll go feral, they'll go wild.
But does it take generations, or does the pig that escaped go feral?
The pig that escaped.
Then is the pig recoverable? Once it's feral, can you recapture it, and will it be a normal, quote unquote, normal pig?
It's above my pay grade right there.
We got to get a hold of Jack.
Mm-hmm.
So that's an interesting concept, right? Because it's like, does it take generations to go back to being feral, or is it something that occurs in that one organism? Does one organism, and does it depend on the organism? I think it does. Does the organism have the capability of becoming feral? So remember the Tarzan story from when you were a kid, right? Kids raised by apes out in the jungle. They bring him in.
Watch your hand with that wine, by the way.
So they bring him in, and they try to teach him language and social skills, and things like that. And they are successful to some extent. Now, are his children domesticated?
Clearly.
Is he domesticated?
Well, he was domesticated by birth, right? Like Tarzan was he
was born a rich kid,
right? And then he went feral.
Correct.
Right.
Yeah. So, I mean, is it that he was feral with no recovery? Because the pigs that you're talking about, they have for generations been domesticated pigs. They are raised for the slaughter.
That's right.
Now, I do have it on good authority that if you do throw a dead body into a group of pigs, they will eat everything and leave nothing behind.
Yeah.
Not really throwing that out there as a possibility to cover up a murder, but I saw it in a movie once. So is that an indication that they're not completely domesticated now?
Yeah, maybe there are some creatures that don't fully go domesticated.
Yeah.
But it seems like of all the creatures out there, that humans are the most domesticatable. Well, what it is to be domesticated is really, it's a measure by humans. So maybe it's getting into that, right? It's like, what does that even mean?
What does
domesticated?
It mean? Yeah.
What does it even mean? Like, it can't be just as simple as like, oh, it'll live around humans, because there's a lot of, like, I was outside today there's a family of rabbits that lives in my backyard.
Aww.
And I was out there today, and they're hopping around right by me. They don't care. I'm sure that if I spent enough time, I could get them to eat out of my hand, no problem.
Yeah.
But they're far from domesticated. These are wild rabbits.
Yeah. I New York is infested with pigeons. I don't think they're domesticated.
Exactly. That's a wild animal.
Yeah. It's a wild animal. And it's within very close proximity to humans 24/7. So what is it? What does the word domestication actually indicate? And does it mean that you're not going to attack, like unprovoked attack humans?
It clearly doesn't mean that, because there are plenty of dogs that will attack humans unprovoked. But they're clearly a domesticated species. It's not, I mean, they're not a wild
domesticated species, but perhaps that one didn't get the message or had a rough childhood.
On the other hand, wolves, adult wolves, a real full-blooded wolf, especially males, undomesticatable. Puppy, no problem. Gets to be big enough, it will fucking kill you.
Interestingly enough, the whole dynamic between wolf and man, from prehistory, and where domesticated dogs actually came from.
Right.
Those men were just as wild as the wolves. They had to be.
Right.
There was no such thing as quote-unquote domestication.
Well, it's the first domesticated animal, right?
But I think they were more like cooperative hunters.
I think that's more what the species of canine dog is to man.
Yes, companion.
Yes,
yeah.
I think that the wild human and the wild dog. I think you're right. When you look at the social structure, the means of communication, the diet, all of these things lined up very, very tightly with one another. And
they formed a symbiosis.
Yeah.
That's what it was. It wasn't domestication. They domesticated us as much as we domesticated them, and I don't even want to call it domestication. There was a symbiotic relationship between those two species.
Yeah, I mean, well, and it probably came about when human beings were hunting like the megafauna.
Sure.
The mammoth and everything, they didn't have the means to sort of store all the meat that they were going to get or to use everything, so there was leftover. I'm sure that these animals...
And certain parts of the animal were a little harder to eat than other parts.
Sure, and they just couldn't... Yeah, sure. And so here you've got these carcasses sort of sitting out, fresh meat. You've got these packs of canines. Who knows what particular type of wolf this first dog was, right? But these packs of canines that perhaps for generations were living, if these were nomadic, perhaps they were following over because why hunt?
Right.
These other things are hunting for us. They were kind of the relationship between like lions and hyenas, probably.
Sure.
And
or sharks and those little tiny fish.
The little lamprey, right?
Yeah.
But the humans wouldn't mind these dogs being on the outskirts, probably just right outside of where the line of their fire, because if some big predator came along, these wolves would go crazy, and then wake the humans up,
or some other tribe of human beings, or whoever.
Even better, another tribe of human beings, right? Which is still, that's still the role that dogs play today. And see, that's not. I don't think we can really call that domestication.
No,
I don't think we can. And cats are not domesticated at all. We are the environment and the landscape that the cats are living in.
Cats allow us to be in their presence. Come on.
This is what I'm saying. So domesticated, I don't think that we have domesticated pets. So then it's like, okay, well then there are the things that we eat.
Sure.
Right? But
as William Riker said, we no longer enslave animals for our food. We do now, but in Star Trek time. So what does domestication mean anyway? Maybe it just means, I think really that if we were looking for the one thing that it means, the one thing that it means is control over population control, basically. Control over breeding.
I think that's the one thing that you could say across all domesticated animals, that human beings, if they don't, some animals, we've bred them physically to a point where they can't even breed without, some species can't even breed without human intervention. But in other cases, I mean, you look at the food animals in particular, the larger ones, artificial insemination that's the norm.
Yeah.
That's the norm.
Mm-hmm.
And then, dogs, spaying and neutering, of course, all of that. Cats, same thing. We feel like we have a right to that in a way that we just simply don't with wild animals. And so I would say if there was one thing that is domestication, is that we feel that population control by controlling breeding.
Interesting. So subjugation of the breeding instinct.
Or just... I don't know if it's subjugation of the instinct, but it's certainly the feeling entitled to prevent or to... feeling entitled to be able to say, oh, this individual of this species needs to either have a child or needs to either reproduce or not reproduce.
So the government of China has domesticated their population.
Well, see, this is what I'm saying. This is exactly what I'm saying, is that like a one-child policy. Yeah. What's really the difference between a one-child policy and spaying and neutering your dog?
Absolutely nothing. Except on the one hand, we're doing it to dogs and cats, which somehow morally and psychologically feels better than doing it to human beings, unless you're Chinese.
Well, but we say that it's for the dog and cat's own good, right? That's the whole thing.
Sure.
But clearly, the entire point, that's a hard one to say. The biological purpose is survival and reproduction. Like this is what every individual of every species, this is their telos, right? Now I guess that's going to be pretty controversial for a lot of people, but it's like that's what, from the single-celled organism to now, the one thing that we all have in common is that every single one of our ancestors survived and reproduced.
Yeah. Reproduction has always been the priority. Organisms will sacrifice vital functions in order to reproduce. I mean, you talk about there are certain species that live for mayflies, 24 hours they spend alive, and most of that time is spent finding and mating, with a mate. So it is the point of life, apparently, to reproduce.
So then, if domestication is the control over the reproductive function, domestication is reducing the individual, is really denying the life of the individual.
Yeah,
it's reducing them to a machine, really, that serves some sort of a function.
Mm-hmm. And the greater good.
The greater good. And to me, I see that notion I see that as the core notion of the idea of civilization. The idea that's underneath civilization is that the individual is some sort of a cog in this wheel of the greater good, that the individual gets its value from not from reproducing, not from passing on its genes, which is where Mother Nature would say that the individual's value is displayed. The individual's value is instead displayed by a contribution to the greater good that allows this greater good to survive. No, see, and that seems like a herd to me. That is a domesticated herd in my mind.
It's a herd if the individuals are not aware of this, and also, I would say if they are aware of this, what the hell are we doing? I mean, honest to God, most of us spend every day of our working lives slaving away in some cubicle somewhere behind a computer screen, wasting every daylight hour in the morning we're driving to work, and then we work all day behind a computer screen, and then we drive home at night. Our lives are literally meaningless and worthless. So what exactly is it that we are contributing to here?
And this is why I think that the ranchers have left the building. I think they've left the building.
So we have no more clear vision,
That's right.
of Pharaoh's goals, right? Build me a pyramid, bury me somewhere nice, right? So we don't have a clear vision of what we're working towards. And that's why, in my opinion, like in my experience, most of society is lost. They're stuck behind their screens. They're stuck behind their social media, and they're just so engrossed in either forms of entertainment or forms of social media or, sitting in front of a television. They genuinely are not connecting with the real world, with any kind of meaning beyond themselves. And that's disturbing.
So what I wonder, though, is if being bred and sort of evolving in this very specific environment of this early civilization, that if we want to call it this ranch or whatever, and you've got this rancher, right? I would tend to believe that it's maybe the same thing as like a cow finding its purpose in the pasture. It feels the cow is comfortable in the pasture. That's where it's supposed to be.
Yeah.
And in the domesticated pasture, right? Like it would probably be a lot less comfortable out in the wild. It wants
dead.
Well, this is what I'm saying. This is what I'm saying. And that perhaps if these ranchers, these cryptoterrestrials, if they went away, that maybe what they left and took with them, and that this sort of cargo cult of pageantry has never really been able to recapture, is that, and maybe that's where some of when we get into the occult wisdom knowledge, the esoteric knowledge, what we're really taking a glimpse of is we're taking a glimpse of sort of the remnants of that tapestry that was spun to keep the human cattle calm. The technology of the Temple Grandin style. Well, if we tell them this particular story and then this thing and then this thing, they'll actually want to do this work that we want them to do. They'll actually want to serve God, which is a lot easier to do when God is standing in front of you.
Yeah. And God literally controls life and death and all things around them.
It's a lot easier to do.
A lot easier to do. And honestly, sufficiently advanced magic or advanced technology does look like magic. So it is totally conceivable that when we look back at the stories of history and we see magical things happening, whether it was Merlin or whether it was Moses or whomever it was from history, and they were documenting the magical things that they saw, was it just misunderstood technology? Not in the ancient alien sense, but in the cryptoterrestrial sense of, I don't ever think the ranchers, if you will, were 1,000,000 years advanced, 1,000 years advanced. I think maybe 100, 200 years advanced.
Yeah, it's not like it would take
at the
that
most.
much. It's not like it would take that much.
Yeah, slightly advanced.
Right, exactly.
So if you have a slightly advanced culture, civilization, whatever, they could impact, have tremendous impact. If you take a look at certain things that have been verified, that have been found out of place, like the Antikythera mechanism.
Talk a little bit about that, because that's a weird one.
So the Antikythera mechanism was found in a shipwreck off the coast of Greece. It is completely legitimate. Please go look this up. It is 100% legit. This is a clockwork computer, essentially, that tracks the motions of celestial objects. The problem is it was invented 1,000 years before it was supposed to be invented. Similar technology did not come along for at least 1,000 years after this thing was made. And the technology that did come along was huge and gigantic and ridiculous looking. This was the iPad version of this technology, which then 1,000 years later was replicated in a UNIVAC style, warehouse sized computer. This thing is small. It's elegant. It fit in a tiny little wood box. And the ship captain would literally just crank the little dial on the side, and it would tell him where the sun was going to be, where the moon was going to be, where the stars were going to be. It would give him all of these astronomical calculations that were incredibly precise. This is the definition of an anachronistic artifact. This thing came out of nowhere. Nobody expected to find this. Initially, there were, suspicions of, must be a hoax. It's got to be fake, blah, blah, blah. No, this is a real thing that was developed at a time where we had no idea that the people at that time had the technology to do this. So then that brings us to our cryptoterrestrial question. Was it us? Or was it the cryptoterrestrials?
Well, it certainly brings up the idea that why would we find evidence of sufficiently advanced technology? Like, why would we? It's not like I can try to go and find, something sufficiently advanced from like 1900. You know what I mean? Like, just seriously, like, go and walk around and try to find any piece of technology from 1900. It's really, really hard to find. And that's if you live in a place where there were actually people living there even in 1900.
Sure.
So
you could go to antique stores, museums, things like that. But as far as finding something on your own,
this is what I'm saying.
Practically impossible.
So, the idea that there were advanced civilizations, and all it takes is just like a few people who are really concerned about a certain particular. The example that I like is Nabta Playa. You know about this place?
Nabta Playa.
Nabta Playa. So this is kind of like an African Stonehenge, almost, you could call it. It's in the Sudanese desert.
Okay.
It's in the desert of Sudan. It's stones, like Stonehenge-style stones, that are, and it's in this area where there are quite a few of these, but the biggest one, that's like the main one, is set up to, again, like map celestial bodies, and particularly to predict the rising of the star Sirius, which is important in that region because that was actually the beginning of the Egyptian New Year, because when the heliacal rising of the star Sirius indicated that 2 weeks later the Nile would flood. And that was actually their first day. So what's interesting about it is that, and the Egyptians say that their religion and their understanding of how to predict this, their astrological knowledge, came from the south, up north. They actually have a place where they believe that it was the birthplace of Horus, who supposedly brought this up the river to them, not too far from Nabta Playa, as it turns out. Well, they've gone back, and what's interesting is, since it's laid out in a very specific way and it's very precise, they can pretty much date when this thing was built. And there's a few dates, right? Because it comes back into alignment with this thing like every once in a while. We've got people doing fireworks here in New Hampshire. It's like I'll look it up, but I believe it's like 6,500 BC, something like that. It's crazy. It's like some crazy long time ago.
Yeah.
And you figure, how long had they had this knowledge before they built this Stonehenge?
Sure.
And what were they doing? Like, that's not that. You don't just get astronomical. Like, you don't just get the astronomy to be able to lay this out perfectly. Like, you've got the math comes from that as well. What are you doing mathematically? Are you building shit? What's the architecture look like? We don't know. We've got the stones that they set in place, but we don't have perhaps all of the other technology that came from this civilization that was a part of Nabta.
So it's really super interesting to me. Because I also recall the Dogon people.
The star Sirius, yep.
Sirius, right. They said that they had, their ancestors, their sky people came from Sirius.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm just like, it's interesting how many cultures were tied to the Sirius star and the entire...
See, but you wonder if the Dogon people might be a cargo cult of the Egyptians. Right?
You think?
Because we know that the entire job of the Egyptian priest class, their entire raison d'etre, their entire idea of why they existed was to be able to predict when this flood was going to occur, because the flooding of the Nile was the complete that was everything. That was everything to Egypt. There's no civilization, there's no life, there's no nation and civilization of Egypt without accurately timing and precisely timing the flooding of the Nile, which was what these guys did. So you wonder if perhaps the Dogon people, so you get the almost worship of the star Sirius and the ability to predict it, and you almost wonder if there's like some guy who's who comes in from that region and they don't really know the science of it. I'm seeing this right now in Bitcoin, right? Like that there's people who have this worshipful attitude towards the technology, yet they don't really know necessarily how to use it. I mean, it's almost like you see with people who are lovers of the iPhone. But they're fanboys, but they're not programmers in any way. They couldn't write an app, but they're huge fanboys.
The vast majority of people today have no idea how the technology they use every day works.
And so that's why I think it would make sense to me that the Dogon religion is like a game of telephone from a Sirius fanboy. Like a star of Sirius, because of its importance to Egypt as a real technology, they're kind of like a fanboy. This is what I've always thought about that, because I do know the thing with Sirius and the Dogon people, but it's a weird star.
It is weird, and it's weird that they would pick that star as the source of their ancestors. It's very strange.
Well, again, unless
they had influence.
Yeah.
Unless they co-opted an Egyptian celebration, holiday thing, whatever, just like Christians do.
Sure.
Practically every Christian holiday is co-opted from something that came before it. So cultures do it all over.
It's, the Egyptians, and again, I think that the Egyptians are probably the idea of the god king, the pharaoh.
Yeah.
Maybe that doesn't just pop out of nowhere. Maybe the first historical pharaohs, which I think is another aspect, is that history. Another reason why I think that these cryptoterrestrials, the ranchers, are no longer on the scene is because we have history. Because we have history. Well, what would be the reason to record anything as the sort of the livestock slave group, why would you have any task with recording? Because the only people for whom it would matter are the ranchers.
Sure.
And ostensibly, they're so much more intelligent that we probably wouldn't be able to record it in a way that would be sufficiently useful to them.
But then, I mean, honestly, don't we have volumes and volumes and volumes of information out there that are recorded, maybe usefully, maybe not usefully, that are being consumed all day long, every day in business, right? Like, seriously, I cannot tell you the amount of data that is actually being recorded in business every single day.
Sure,
Now, it's all livestock doing the recording, but I can't help but think that as a rancher, if you could have your cows count themselves, count their offspring, track their progeny, do some, basic mathematics, that wouldn't be somewhat useful.
Okay. I mean, I could go with that, but I don't. But still, to me, that's not necessarily history, right? Like,
it becomes history.
I
mean, we started with the Sumerian kings list. That was basically that, and then history follows from there.
Although I wonder if there wouldn't have been utility in sort of I think only the cargo cult would have needed to record the kings list.
Sure.
Because the actual ranchers, would they really have needed to record these types of lists per se?
Not in a format that we could understand.
This is what I'm saying.
Yeah.
So that tells me that if these guys are around, that I think they've dipped out. I think they've fled the scene.
Peace out, bitches.
And I don't know that there's any way that we could ever know this, but it sort of leaves this. It leaves me with this very weird feeling every time I think about this, because it's like, it's such a weird origin story, and it's so sort of like, it's almost like shameful. It's almost a shameful origin story. Which is the reason why I think nobody. Like, this is not the type of idea that people find sexy or glamorous or would like to talk about, because it's kind of like, oh, so we're just like cows and the rancher died and then we're stuck on the farm trying to be like the ranchers. That's kind of lame. And
yeah, there's no superhero movie here.
No, there's no superhero
there's no Captain America coming to the rescue, being the best of the best. There's none of that. This is, we managed to survive because we were the most domesticated dogs we could find.
And the desire for these gods, which every society has had. And also the pervading theme of the god who has left but will return someday.
Oh my God, that's pervasive.
Throughout
history. Every religion has just about every religion has the same kind of paradigm, the same kind of archetype, where you have, some kind of great, like, pristine, like, Garden of Eden kind of scenario, right? Then there's some kind of falling out, then there's a God presence, and then the God goes away, but then the God's going to come back someday, if you're good. And if you, say your prayers and eat your vitamins and drink your milk, that idea really is pervasive throughout many modern religions.
Well, and even ancient ones. I mean,
sure.
The Hopi, even Native American religions. I mean, the Hopi religion has the ideas that, like, the great white spirit will return back, which is the manifestation of the god. The Aztecs had Quetzalcoatl that had left and then would return. And that was one of the reasons that, like, Cortez, that for a little minute there, people were like, is this Quetzalcoatl? Like, is he back? And that's, never mind that they had been ravaged by plague, but that's one of the reasons why, that was their downfall, was that little bit of, like, confusion and cognitive dissonance. I just think that it's a very, very, it's beyond coincidence that you would have this theme of this god went away and left us, but will be back someday, almost as some like thing of hope, to where it's like, yeah, if this scenario that we're talking about, where these ranchers either died off, left the planet, somehow were no longer on the scene, and just left the cattle on the ranch, you would expect to wind up with this narrative coursing through sort of the veins of spiritual history.
And how connected is that with our almost, I would say, genetic need for subjugation? Like, if you recall, and this is a recent example, but the first Avengers movie where Loki came out and he's like, makes everybody kneel when he's in Germany, right? And, it's like, this is your natural state. You were born to kneel. I honestly, in my experience, people crave being led.
Oh, yeah.
They want somebody else, not them, but they want somebody else to stand up and take the leadership reins and tell them what to do. And honestly, it's scary. It is very scary. And some people in this world, if you look back in history, have accomplished some really horrific things by taking those reins and taking their subjects in the wrong direction. And it's a natural component of humanity, in my opinion. People crave that. People want that. So the whole missing God, he's going to come back someday and lead us all into salvation.
It's often that, yeah, lead us. It's either lead you into salvation or destroy everything.
Yeah, but destroy everything and then bring me to heaven because I'm special.
Win. You still win, yeah.
Right. Either way, that is a tremendously emotional connection. And perhaps, speaks to the conditioning that we've been through.
Yeah, that's this idea that people want to be. See, we're not just social creatures. That's not enough. There are social, like we talk about, like the wolves. Like the wolves, they have their hierarchy. It's mainly
there has to be a hierarchy.
Matrilineal. They have their hierarchy, but the question is, do they have a craving to be led? I mean, I guess it has to be innate to you in order for the hierarchy to emerge.
Yeah.
It has to be innate.
There are certain wolves that will challenge the leader, and they will either succeed or die.
Right.
The end. Right? So the wolf that succeeds takes over. He is now leader, and all the other wolves follow. If the wolf dies, the old leader is still the leader, and all the other wolves follow. The wolves are not independently minded and wanting to go their own way and do their own thing. You don't have 50,000 wolves sitting out there, each one an island to themselves doing their own thing. You have packs, and a pack is a hierarchy. And if you own dogs, you know what I'm talking about. You have to be at the top of that hierarchy. Otherwise, your dogs will misbehave horribly. But if you are the top of that pyramid, if you're the top leader dog in that hierarchy, your dogs are beautiful. Your dogs are great. And
they actually seem happier.
They are happier, and so are people.
Right. Yeah, but then that may actually say that perhaps we're not domesticated. Like, that may actually say that perhaps, because it evolved, it clearly, as we said with the wolves, like this is clearly naturally evolved in the wolves.
Sure.
This instinct. Is it naturally evolved in humans as well? Perhaps we're not domesticated. Perhaps, again, it's just really asking the question, like, what does that word domestication mean? What does it signify?
That's the thing. And that's what we need clarity on. What is domestication, right? Because as I look around this room right now, we are surrounded. Oops, I just made a big boom there. We are surrounded by glass, right? Like, literally, it would take no effort to bounce in here and
I think about this all the time.
Take our stuff.
I think about this all the time.
It doesn't happen.
No, it doesn't happen. It doesn't.
Because people are civilized. Now, is civilized a synonym of domesticated?
I don't know. I don't know.
It could be. I mean, I'm not sure what our definition of domesticated is. I'm not sure what our version of civilized is. I think, not breaking into somebody's house and killing them and taking their stuff, I think that's pretty civilized.
But that hasn't been the norm for most of human history.
Hasn't it?
No.
I think.
Well, not raiding opposing tribes is pretty much a norm of.
Opposing tribes. What about your own tribe? Right? Like,
no, not within your own tribe. Not within your own tribe, you wouldn't. But see, you'd know everybody in your own tribe.
And we don't know anybody.
That's what I'm saying.
Yeah. It's like today, in modern day America, we don't have tribes. We don't have groups. We might know our neighbors a little bit, or we might have like a pal group that we hang out with online or whatever.
Sure. Right.
But honestly, like if you walk through your neighborhood, you walk down the street.
Oh, I don't know.
Do you know everybody?
Not really.
I don't know everybody.
Not really.
I don't know anybody who knows everybody.
I mean, I say hello. I don't know 90% of their names.
I mean, this isn't the 1950s, right? So we literally live in a world where we are transient. We go from city to city to city. We look for the best job. We look for the opportunities, and we literally don't give a crap who our neighbors are. We have given up the pack, and we have gone towards a more loner existence, which leads me to believe, like, what are we doing as far as our security? Like, we are surrounding ourselves with glass doors, but yet we're still secure. So the killer instinct, the hunter instinct, has been suppressed. It has. Now, even though, yes, we still have that hierarchical need for leadership. We crave somebody leading over us for the most part. There is also this politeness. There is also this domestication, if you want to call it that, civilized behavior where we don't go, breaking into our neighbors' homes and breaking stuff and killing people. That, for the most part, 90% of the country doesn't do that.
I'd say 99%.
99% of the country doesn't do that.
That's because otherwise, and that they don't, because of the simple fact that, as you just pointed out, we are sitting here surrounded by glass. That, quite honestly, it would be very, very easy.
Yeah,
very easy.
A child could do it.
Now, I mean, they would have to, if there's somebody home, they're going to have to potentially deal with an armed homeowner, right?
Sure.
Especially here in New Hampshire.
Yeah.
But
we are well armed in New Hampshire.
So there's that. I wonder, on this idea of taking a more loner existence, if that almost doesn't take the internal desire for a strong external leader at the top of the pyramid, if that almost doesn't incentivize it more. Because I feel like
people need it more.
Yeah, I feel like those people who have the tightest or the largest egalitarian community are the least likely to find a totalitarian style leader attractive. Does that make sense to you? Like, it's almost like you look at people like the Amish or something like that, right? Or like religious communities that are these sort of long-lived religious communities, not like a cult of personality, but like something that's been around for a long time, right? And maybe even look at the Mormons.
Sure.
Right? It's weird flying into Salt Lake City is truly odd. If people have not done it, if you can make a stopover in Salt Lake City ever on a flight, it is the weirdest. There is no weirder landscape to fly into. And then flying over, I mean, it's no surprise that their state flag has a beehive on it, because it's like community, all the houses the same style, church, and then a little ways church, and then a little ways church, and then bigger church that all of these little churches are, and it's just like, whoa. And all the houses have the same architecture as the churches, and it's like, whoa, this is crazy. But it seems like at the point that, like, they just recently switched out their prophet, you know. Maybe back in the day of Joseph Smith and Brigham Young, there was this craving for, like, some sort of powerful leader. But it seems like now, these groups that are very interwoven and egalitarian and community-based and really have that tight level of fellowship, it seems like they don't really want a strong leader at the top of the pyramid per se, right? They want someone to sort of keep shit together, but they don't really want anyone who will do anything other than the status quo. Whereas I feel like, you know, the reason why you get a Trump is because of the level, and the only way that you can have that, I feel like, is almost, and we see it, is that people aren't talking to each other. People don't have a sense of community with one another.
Right. They're not talking to each other. No, they're not relating
to each other.
At all.
Yes, that's what I'm saying.
Yeah. So I would really love to know the statistics for the suicide rates amongst the Amish, amongst the Mormons.
Probably low, I would think.
Probably extremely low.
I would think low, yeah.
And I would think that, you know, even though you don't have a charismatic cult of personality style leader, you still have a strong hierarchical leadership system.
Yes, sure.
Very much like the wolf pack, because you don't just have the wolf leader, you also have the wolf's lieutenants, you have the other, you know, wolf characters. And I really think that these organizations, the long-term organizations that are hundreds of years old, they have that kind of internal structure. And, you know, that's where people, they get a lot of strength from that, and they get a lot of peace and calm, you know, from that. And I think that we are experiencing basically a suicide epidemic, I would say, in this country, because people are lost, people are isolated, people are feeling like they are alone, nobody understands them, nobody has any idea what they're going through, and nobody can relate, right? And it's because we have this separation, because our relationships are built on social media, which is nothing. I mean, come on. It's like you have to sit in front of somebody and have a conversation before you can be friends with that person. You cannot meet somebody online and have any meaningful relationship. I don't care how, you know, people will argue this point, but I'm telling you, you cannot have a meaningful relationship with somebody who just exists on your computer screen.
Oh, dude, 100%. Well, you can have I think you can have a negative relationship. See, this is what I find so interesting about the whole social media phenomenon, is that, and this is at least what has been true in my experience, is that it's very, very difficult to develop a deep positive relationship, but it's very easy to develop a negative relationship that is at a degree that it is very, very difficult to engender with someone that you know in person. Like, two people who are otherwise healthy, two people who otherwise, were they to just meet each other on the street, or their relationship had started in person, perhaps they don't particularly think that the other one's interesting, or they particularly want to hang out, but the level of animosity that it can be taken to in a social media context between two strangers is so much higher than anyone would ever, I think, feel comfortable taking it to in person.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Because you're not in person. There's no physical threat. Honest to God, if you're standing in front of somebody it doesn't matter, what gender they are, how big they are, what color they are. None of that matters. What matters is you have a physical entity in front of you, and are you going to behave the same way in front of that person in physical reality versus online, half anonymous, behind a Twitter account or a Facebook? No. I mean, there's a completely different level, because people have governors. People govern themselves, and the lizard brain kicks in, and you're like, okay, okay, I get it that this guy's shorter than me, but he might know karate.
Or have a gun, or just be fucking crazy.
Right.
Crazy.
He goes Hannibal Lecter and bite your nose off.
And just pick up a bottle and like hit somebody. But this is, I think that contributes to, well, it's a marker of this isolation that we're talking about.
It is. Absolutely.
And I mean, it's we're having a suicide epidemic. It's interesting, the suicide rates have risen so significantly. I remember, back, this is probably early 90s, talking to Japanese exchange students about how the suicides among young people would be after exams if people had like not, they'd be like, oh yeah, if people don't pass their exams, they'll go and they'll kill themselves. Like like it was no big thing. You know what I mean? It's just so normal to them.
Yeah.
But again, it's like it's this isolation. I think that's a different type of isolation. It still is about. It's not just. I think the Japanese example says it's not just about having structure and a hierarchy. That's not going to do it on its own. That can certainly be pathological and drive you to feeling just as isolated as a sort of a lack of a structure and a hierarchy.
But I would argue that their structured hierarchy is not at all like the wolf pack. I would say a wolf pack is very social, very connected. Like, you are directly connected to the people that are around you in your hierarchy, and you hunt with them, you participate with them, you live with them, you sleep with them, you eat with them. Like, in the wolf pack, like, yeah, there might be one wolf that leads the pack, and he might have a couple of buddies that, enforce his will or whatever, but most of the pack, they're doing everything together. But you look at, Japanese culture, there are 30, 35-year-old men who are living in their parents' basement, and they spend all day looking at anime porn.
If they're lucky.
That's not a life.
No, it's not. Well, I think what you're talking about is you're talking about the difference, but it's the difference in agency, right? That it's like hierarchies are naturally emergent.
Yeah.
But you've got a wolf pack. The hierarchy is determined by who's in the pack. It's not already there, and then the idea is like, oh, new wolf, here, we put you here.
No.
Then you wolf, we put you here. It's more like, well, we put you all together, and then a hierarchy will emerge from out of that.
It will.
And that is what I think people feel comfortable in. That is what people see as community. That maybe, perhaps, see, and I even think that that's probably a lot closer to healthy domestication. It's kind of like throw them all out into the pasture, so long as they play by the rules of the farm, then they could do whatever. This other thing, I'm not convinced that that's part of the initial plan. If we're still talking cryptoterrestrials and ranchers, like, I almost think that this is the pathological. This is the animal farm. This is the livestock trying to create a structure for the other livestock, as opposed to just allowing these things to naturally emerge. That it's like that's what creates the rash of suicides. That's what creates the feeling of aloneness. And I think in many ways, if you look at social media is really the manifestation. Because already it's like, okay, here's your account. You can do certain things. You can communicate in this amount of characters. You can have this big of a little avatar. You can have this many words to describe yourself. Really? You can really describe yourself in like this little tiny thing? What does that communicate about you?
I mean, you're boxed in. You're completely
You're literally in a box.
Somebody, some random person at Facebook, Twitter, wherever, decided, like whatever it is, 150 words, whatever. That's plenty for somebody to describe themselves. Mm-hmm. Are you freaking kidding me? Mm-hmm. I mean, I don't care if you're 10 years old. You've had more life experience than will fit in 150 words. So come on. Mm-hmm. Like, why are we not connecting? Why are we not actually physically connecting with people? Instead, it's easy, right? We stare at screens. It's partially anonymous. We could, be a troll, whatever. Mm-hmm. It's unreal. But I do think that your point is totally valid. This could just be a symptom of the ranchers having gone away. Like, this is Animal Farm, left to our own devices. What do we do? And we come up with these various ways to disenfranchise, destroy, completely emasculate ourselves as a species.
Yeah. The question is, where is the reward, right? That's what I always wonder about is, we're sitting here and it's so very clear from anyone's experience that those sort of deep personal face-to-face relationships are so much more rewarding, but I guess only if they're familiar. That's the interesting thing. I mean, we're coming into a generation where...
Familiar in what way, though?
Well, like that you've actually had them. So okay, example. Any activity that you do sort of as a group of people or one-on-one. Let's say playing chess, right? Okay. Or I like to play beach volleyball. I love to play beach volleyball. It's a partner game, right? It's the interesting thing about beach volleyball is it's enjoyable at sort of two ends of the spectrum, and there's this middle piece where it's very unenjoyable. It's enjoyable if you have absolutely no skill at,
I thought you were going to say abs.
No.
Yes, it's enjoyable if you have abs.
Well, no. Well, yes and no. If you have absolutely no skill and you're just out with a group of people to kill time at the beach and there's a bunch of you and you're just playing volleyball like at a family picnic or something like that.
Sure.
Fun. Then it's fun if you have skills to play at a professional, not a professional level, but a competitive level.
Sure.
Where like you could compete at least in like the amateur circuit and be able to compete at least like what they would call like a B level or something like that.
You're not going to embarrass yourself.
You won't embarrass yourself. You can actually you might make some mistakes here and there, but that the majority of time you will do things in a way that someone would look and be like, oh, that person can play. The space in between that is incredibly unenjoyable. Incredibly unenjoyable. And I think that in some ways, I mean, like, even a conversation like this, I think falls into that same realm. That it's almost like if you have no self-consciousness, like a small child, right? They don't know anything about social interactions, this, that, or the other. It's just stimulus to them. It's fun.
Sure.
And if you have a lot of experience in having conversations with people, being able to have a dialogue, a back and forth, you've gained some knowledge, you're a conversationalist, then conversations are fun. You enjoy it, but only when you have a conversation partner. Same thing with the volleyball.
Yeah.
Right? Because you could be a professional level player.
But if you're playing against an elementary school team?
Well, no. If they don't know how to play at all, it can still be fun. That's what I'm saying. But if you're a professional level player and you're playing with somebody who's like really actually trying to play in that way. You
but
haven't
they
just
have no
like
idea.
disregarded all the rules.
Yeah.
Because you would be a pro player, but you play at a barbecue with your family and nobody else knows how to play.
Sure, and nobody cares.
No, you don't
Yeah.
care. You disregard all the rules.
Yeah.
Right? But you're playing with somebody who actually knows the rules, but they're just playing terribly and they're your partner. You don't want to play. Because it takes two to tango. I imagine it's the same for like ballroom dancers.
Absolutely.
Right?
It's a give and take.
It's a give and take. And so a generation is now emerging that has no experience. None. With any of this in person. And,
No.
and what you see is that, we like the things we're good at and we're good at the things that we like. As time goes on and you get a population that just is not used to having those types of interactions, those interactions happen less and you get the feedback loop, right? To the point where, when does it become weird to actually have a face-to-face interaction? Like, oh my God, you talked to that person, you actually like said words to them in person? Oh, you actually like shook their hand? That's strange. Like, what are you, some kind of a fucking primitive? Like, how uncivilized of you that you didn't, like instant message them as they pass by or something like that. I feel like we're coming to that point.
We are. We are definitely coming to that point. I'm seeing it more and more, right? Where the expectation is not that you will have a one-on-one conversation with a person, particularly in the workplace, right? It's like people don't want you to call. They want you to email. That's been going on forever.
Slack just went down, and they were like, well, I guess our company can't work anymore. People were saying, oh my God, I actually have to go down the hallway and actually like talk to my coworker now that Slack is down.
I know. Weird, right? It's like literally get off your ass, walk 20 feet, and talk to a person. Come on. And I don't mean to sound like, old guy shouts at cloud, but but this is a serious problem that we are encountering as a society. As a society, we are isolating ourselves, and we are feeling the effects of isolating ourselves. We are becoming less and less connected to the real world, to real people. And, one of the saddest things that ever happened to me was also one of the happiest things that ever happened to me. I was hanging out with a buddy of mine, and I gave him a hug. I gave him like a real good, hug. And he like got emotional. He's like, you have no idea how long it's been since I've had somebody hug me.
Wow. That's crazy.
And I'm like, are you serious? Like, this was not like a freak of nature. He wasn't like a member of the circus.
I'm a hugger, man, so that doesn't, I don't.
This is just normal dude.
Yeah.
And, and literally, like, I hugged him again. I was just like, come on. Like, how can you go through your life not having physical contact, physical interaction, face-to-face, talking to people? But, left to our own devices, I think a lot of us would rather just spend 24 hours a day locked up in our room surfing the internet.
Or listening to podcasts.
Yes, listening to this podcast in particular.
Which, speaking of listening to podcasts, if people have been listening since the beginning, they've been listening for an entire 2 hours because
2 hours.
We're done.
Wow.
That's our first podcast.
It feels like we've barely gotten started. Honest to God, I want to go back and talk about, not like right now, but soon. We should definitely talk about the pageantry, because I believe that there is a tremendous amount of information that we need to share about the pageantry, about the costumes, about the religious significance and the potential historical and, crypto significance of all these things. It's so exciting.
Let's do it.
Can't imagine.
So we've got so much more. We've got so much more to get into. So much more to talk about. But we will do it on our next episode. This was great, dude. Speaking of conversations, this is fantastic. I'm glad we decided to record these.
Thank you so much. This
awesome.
is so much fun,
awesome.
brother. So much fun.
Great first episode. Thank you, everybody, for checking us out. we'll figure out all the things with the proper website and all of that. But for now, you know where to reach us and how to check out the show. YouTube.com/VinArmani. I'll put it on my Twitter and Periscope, but I think I'm going to probably put up our own little Twitter and Periscope for this. So thank you, Dave, and thank you, guys, and we will see you all again next time.